Alrighty, students, let us begin our lesson for today. Today we'll be looking into the first section in Chapter 5, Section 5.1. We'll be looking at ratios, and once again, page number, some of you are forgetting to write that down. Anywho, alrighty, so we have a few definitions for today's lessons. Let's get the first one down. A ratio is a comparison of two quantities by division. Okay? Now, I think that is a great definition, but I have a problem with it. There might be words in the definition that we don't know, okay? So what you need to do is, if you don't ever know a word, you can, look it up, ask your parents. So if you recognize that there are some words in here that you don't know, maybe put a question mark by it, like comparison, quantities, the word to. If you don't know what those words are, put a question mark by them. Ask your parents to help you understand them a little bit more. Because if you don't understand the words in a definition, how are you ever going to understand the word that is being defined? Okay? All right, a little bit of information. You can write a ratio three ways. A ratio can be written, for instance, 5 to 7. 5, this is pronounced the same way as this, 5 to 7. And this is the same way, 5 to 7. One uses the word to, one uses the symbol, the colon symbol, and the other one writes it like a fraction. A fraction is a ratio, okay? A fraction is a way of writing a ratio, which is one way we're going to typically write it. You'll see it written in like word sentences like this typically. You'll see it written a lot of times by like statistic-wise, more like this. And more mathematical, everyday mathematics, we write it like this. All right, another example, once again, you have like if you're comparing 8 to 10, you could write it these different ways. Notice that the first number in the ratio is the top number on the fraction. Okay, that's important. It is important to note that the 8 is in the front, the 8 is in the front, 8 is on the top. Okay, it's important to know where those locations go, because you'll have questions when you do worksheets on these types of problems that'll be like, hey, what is another way you could write this ratio? And if you were to just get these things backwards or switched, it would be wrong, so don't do that. Okay, writing equivalent ratios. We've already done something just like this when we were writing equivalent fractions. And since a fraction is a ratio, you've technically already done this. But for instance, it says find a ratio equivalent to 1/5. Well, what does the word equivalent mean? I will tell you what that. Equivalent means basically equal to. It means it's equal to, but not using the same numbers, like using something of equivalent value. For instance, I could have $1, or I could have 4 quarters. It's the same amount of money, right? But they're not exactly the same. I mean, 4 quarters is not the same as a dollar bill, but their value is the same, okay? So a fraction that is equivalent, or a ratio that's equivalent to this, we could say is 2 over 10. That's 1. So we could, I'm going to put this over here, put 1/5 is equal to 2 over 10. Okay? Well, you could also say that it's this is equal to 10 over 50. You could say that it is 3 over 15. You could say it's 100 over 500. Okay? So these are all fractions that are actually equal to each other. They're all the same. They're just being represented in different ways. Okay? Hopefully you understand that. All right, this is the more difficult part. Okay? So it says write a ratio for 3 feet to 66 inches as a fraction in simplest form. So one thing we have to understand is when you are told to write different measurements, like feet and inches, and you're supposed to write it as a ratio, we need to convert it to the same thing. So if I have 3 feet to 66 inches, I need to put this in the same unit. And it's easier to turn the bigger units, convert those to inches. So it's easier to convert feet to inches. So if I have 3 feet, what is 3 feet equal to in inches? Well, we've done problems like this before. Hopefully you remember. I told you this stuff would come back up. 3 feet is equal to 36 inches, okay? And then you have 66 inches right there, because that didn't change. All right, now this is a fraction. How could you reduce this? Well, right now I notice that 6 seems to go into both of these, and so 6 goes into this top one 6 times. 6 goes into this bottom one 11 times. So I have my ratio would be 6 to 11. Like, why did you reduce it? Well, it did say write it as a fraction in simplest form. So you have 6 to 11 right there, okay? Now, there are more types of problems that we will cover in this section, but I'm going to wait to introduce some of those to you in the classroom. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the next section real quick. And again, this next section is going to have a little bit of writing with it. So if you need to pause the video at any point during this lesson, don't hesitate. Just pause it, okay? But this lesson is 5.2, unit rates. And it can be found in your book on page 232. Now, unit rates is actually, it's kind of where we bring the ratios into the real world and make them have practical use. So this is a very practical section. So, but we does have a lot of writing. There's not a lot of math work here, okay? So I do need you to write down this stuff. You need everything because I'm going to be checking using your note quiz to see if you've written this stuff down. So I suggest you write it all down. All right, so the first thing we have up is a rate. So a rate is a ratio that compares two quantities measured in different units. A rate is a ratio that compares two quantities measured in different units. So if you think back in the last section, even though we were comparing feet to inches, which those are kind of, you might say, different units, you can convert feet to inches. Okay, so those are real easy. But rates involve usually units that can't be converted to one or the other. An example is, this is one you see every day. If you grab some food items at your house that have these labels, the nutritious labels on them, not nutritious, whatever, you know what I mean. It tells you how much nutrients is in the food. If you look at those labels, it tells you how much is in their total, and then it tells you how many serving sizes it might have, or it might tell you how many is in each serving size. But anyways, let's say you had a can of soup. So like a can of soup having 20 grams of fat. So it has 20 grams of fat in 5 servings. So this big old can of soup, it's got 5 servings in it. It has a total of 20 grams. So the rate would be 20 grams of fat in per 5 servings, okay? So that's a rate. Is there any way that you can convert the fat to a serving? Those are measuring two completely different things. A serving is like an amount, like put into the bowl. Like that's a measurement in volume compared to grams, which is a measurement in weight. You can't convert those two back and forth. All right, so let's take a look at this. Next word we need to define. Remember, pause it if you need to. Next word we need to define is unit rate. A unit rate is a rate for 1 unit of a given quantity. A unit rate is a rate for 1 unit of a given quantity. And you're thinking like, what? So for instance, it's where you take one of the units, typically the one that is put in the denominator, and you get that down to one of them. So the idea is if we have 20 grams of fat in 5 servings, well, how many grams of fat are in 1 serving? I want to know what is 1 unit. Okay, I get the serving size down to 1. And how many grams of fat do I have? So for instance, using the example we used above, if there's 20 grams of fat in 5 servings, that would be our unit rate, or that would be our rate. then 4 grams of fat per serving is our rate. We just divide, okay? Because this is like a fraction, you can just divide it. So if I have 20 grams of fat in 5 different servings, if I were to put each serving into bowls, so I have 5 bowls, how many grams of fat are in each bowl? Well, if you divided it by 5, you'd have 4 grams of fat, okay? We're going to look at a few more examples, especially in class, we'll look at this a lot more. But here are some other examples. Here we have 50 miles to 5 days. Let's say like this is a cross-country runner. This is a rate, okay? So a rate that they could give us is that a cross-country runner has been running for 5 days, not straight, but off and on for 5 days. And over the course of 5 days, he's run 50 miles total, okay? So that's a rate. We're comparing miles to days. Remember, these are different units. You've got miles, which is a distance, a length, and days, which is it's a measurement of time. You can't actually convert those two back and forth. So here we have this written like this, but if you were told to write this as a unit or find the unit rate of this, the idea is to find out how many miles did he run in one day. On average is basically what we're doing. So you just divide. So he ran how many miles in one day? So we would say, so to one day, you can put the number 1 if you want to. So for one day, how many miles did he run? Well, it would be 10 miles. Okay, 10 miles, and I'm actually going to take out the word to and put the word per. Okay, that's basically saying for every day he ran 10 miles. All right. Last problem we have here is $2 per 20 ounces. So if you have $2 per 20 ounces, so like a bottle of liquid. This is like saying if I had a bottle of liquid and it weighed 20 ounces and it cost $2, okay? Once again, we're comparing two completely different units. We're comparing money, monetary value, with ounces, which is a weight value, okay? So you have something here and it weighs 20 ounces, it costs $2. How does unit rate play in? Well, unit rate can tell us how much each of those ounces is going to cost. So we can convert these 2 ounces into what we would need to do. So we would divide. So if I had, for instance, the idea is, how much money am I paying? You could just almost draw your blank right there. How much am I paying per 1 ounce? So for every ounce, how much money am I paying right here, okay? How much am I going to be paying? We'll just divide. You could take your, if this was written as a fraction, remember, if this was written as a fraction, the 20 would be on the bottom, the 2.00 would be on top. So you could divide. You'd say 20 goes into 2.00, okay? So 20 go into 2, but 20 can go into 20. So it goes in there one time. You multiply it back, you get 20, you get your 0. Okay, so that 0 just goes up there. You get 10. So it cost, make sure you put the 0.10. Usually we don't bother with that extra 0, but because this is money, you do have to put that. You can't just put, it cost $0.1. You can't say $0.1. No, you got to say it costs 10 cents. And that's how you write it. You put a 0, decimal, 10. Okay? So it costs 10 cents for each ounce. Now, some of you are thinking like, well, why would we ever use this? That's a great question. And actually, your homework is to find that out. You're allowed to ask your parents to help you or explain this to you, but I want you to talk to them and say, Mom, when am I ever going to use this? Okay? When does this come in handy? And most of your parents, I think, are going to know the answer to this question. But just ask them, Mr. Preston told me to ask you a question about this problem right here. Do I use stuff like this on a day-to-day basis? Do adults ever look at stuff like this? When do you ever compare money to the ounces you buy or to the grams or to the pound and stuff like that? When is that used? So get them to see if they can help you figure out this answer to this question. And you need to be coming to class being ready to answer this question, okay? It will be a bonus question for you on your note quiz. So be prepared to answer this, okay? See you in class. Oh, wait, one last thing. I almost forgot. You need to bring a calculator to class. You're thinking, what? Yes, in this section, section 5.2, we will be doing some work with a calculator. It doesn't need to be a technical one. It can just be a simple little calculator that lets you divide and multiply. So go ahead and bring a calculator. See you in class. Bye-bye.